MotoGP, the pinnacle of two-wheeled motorsport for over 75 years, where a group of insane people get paid to race 200-plus mile-an-hour motorcycles around a track for the completely arbitrary reward of points, and the much less arbitrary reward of money, but that's not the point. Speaking of points, today we have this point system. It's a pretty good point system. The top 15 riders in a race get rewarded for their efforts on the track, with first place getting 25 points, 15th getting only 1, and everyone else getting somewhere in the middle. Most people agree that this point system is pretty good. It's been in use for over 30 years for a reason. But is it the best point system? Come to think of it, how did we even get here? When the riders first lined up on the grid in 1949, surely they didn't use the point system that we use today. Well, as it turns out, MotoGP has used 9 different point systems, 10 if you count the recent addition of sprint races. Today, I want to look back at the history of the MotoGP point system, starting in 1949 and working our way back to today, to figure out which one is the best. But how are we going to compare point systems from completely different eras? Well, we're going to do it by rescoring the 2020 MotoGP season with every point system from MotoGP history. Why 2020? Well, it was already a chaotic enough year, so I don't feel bad changing it. And also, it was a pretty close season. 9 different riders scored wins, and the top 9 riders were all within 50 points of each other. Also, I tried doing this with 2023, and Bagnaia just won every single time, so...
We haven't seen action like this as Rossi runs off!
Before we jump into the history of the point system, let's examine the basics and today's point system a little more thoroughly. Throughout the years, Grand Prix motorcycle racing has used 2 different types of point systems, net point systems and gross point systems. A net point system only takes into account a certain number of races where the rider achieved the best results. The results from these races are called a rider's net points, whereas a gross point system takes into account every single result from every single race. The current system is a gross points system, where the top 15 riders are rewarded for their efforts. This system was designed to place heavy emphasis on the podium positions, with the top 3 riders getting 20, 15, and 16 points respectively. This system is pretty universally liked and didn't receive any updates until the introduction of sprint races in 2023, which awards points to the top 9 riders in each race. Here are the results from the 2020 championship as they happened. This will be our control to see how all other point systems work. In real life, Joan Mir won the Riders' Championship with 171 points, through an impressive display of consistency. He only won a single race, but managed to secure a podium in 7 of the shortened season's 14 rounds, and never finished lower than 7th in races where he didn't retire. Behind Mir is Franco Morbidelli, with 158 points, who rode much less consistently, but did win 3 Grand Prix and secured 5 podiums. The next 7 riders were all separated by just 14 points, so anything can happen here. Now that we all know how things actually turned out, let's go back and take a look at...
Newman makes a good recovery on a tricky corner.
The first ever Motorcycle Grand Prix World Championship, and we need a point system. The FIM's top point system scientists sat down, got to work, and came up with a system where the top 5 riders are rewarded for each race. What? Only 5? That's right. Only 5 riders in each race would be awarded for their efforts. But, in addition, riders who set the fastest lap time during the race would receive an extra point, but only if they finished the race. This is something I actually really like, and I kinda wish we would bring back the fast lap point in modern MotoGP. How many results would be counted towards a rider's net points? Well, while the FIM would later devise a formula to properly work out how many results should be counted for each season, things were a little different the first time around. See, the championship started with 5 different classes: 125cc, 250cc, 350cc, the premier class of 500cc, and sidecars. However, not all of these classes were held at each event. The 125s and sidecars would only be held at 3 of the 6 rounds, the 250s at 4, and the 350s at 5. Thus, the FIM elected to count the 3 best results from each class, so every single class would have the same number of results. The 125cc and sidecar classes would be on a gross point system, while every other class would be on a net point system. Let's see how this system works. If we rescore the 2020 championship using the 1949 system, we find out that Fabio Quartararo What? Fabio Quartararo? Where did he even finish in He finished 8th? And Joan Mir fell to 6th? How did this happen? Well, since only the top 3 results are counted, consistency isn't rewarded at all in this system. It may have worked well for the 6-round championship of 1949, but in the 14-round championship of 2020, almost 80% of results don't count towards your net points. In fact, since 2 riders won 3 races in 2020, Quartararo and Morbidelli, the championship came down to the additional points given out for fast laps, of which Quartararo had 2, in Andalusia and Catalunya, beating out Morbidelli's singular fast lap from Teruel. These fast laps are actually a little more interesting than they seem, since today you can be given a fast lap for a race you didn't actually finish, but in 1949 this wasn't the case. You had to finish a race in order to have the fast lap count. Because of this, Marc Marquez's fast lap from the Spanish Grand Prix and Ben Yaya's fast lap in the Emilia-Romagna round were instead given to Maverick Vinales, catapulting him up into 3rd place from 7th. Alex Rins loses his fast lap in Austria to Andrea Dovizioso, bringing the Italian rider up into 9th. Overall, this point system kind of sucks. It only takes into account a few results from a few races, and it really doesn't work well when you transfer it to modern systems that have significantly longer calendars. It worked for one very short season, but soon the FIM realized they would need a new point system, as they headed into
Duke, Armstrong, Kavanagh, and other British aces ride Italian mounts because Britain's...
The FIM got to work. They sent their point-scoring scientists back into the lab to come up with a system that had some real innovation, some real cutting-edge points technology. And they stole the point system from their 1930s European Championship. To be entirely fair to the FIM, they did change one thing. The new system would be a net point system as opposed to a gross point system. That's not better. That's not better. I really shouldn't be so rude to the 1950 system. It did make one big change. The top 6 riders would now be awarded for points. Truly. Points for the whole field. The real big innovation that came along with this point system was the formula that determined how many races to count towards each rider's net points. The formula they settled on was the number of races in the season divided by 2 plus 1. If there were an odd number of races, just add 1 and then divide by 2. In 1950, this meant that 4 races would count towards each rider's net points. But if we apply it to the 2020 season, we find that 8 races are counted towards a rider's net points. So who would win the 2020 season using this point system? Well, it turns out that Franco Morbidelli just barely edges out Joan Mir for the title, 43 points to 41. With a smaller sample size, Morbidelli is almost as consistent as Mir, but his 3 wins to Mir's 1 help him get the win here. The drop-off in points with this system is pretty harsh, with 3rd place only getting half the points that the winner gets, so Morbidelli's higher win count is more valuable here than in other systems. But will he win again in...
Never content to sit behind, so he repasses as they streak past the pits.
1969. What a wonderful year. Woodstock, the moon landing, and a brand new FIM point system, baby. The FIM finally decided to start awarding points to riders outside the top 6. The new system gave out points to the top 10 riders in each race, with the winner getting 15 points, 2nd place getting 12, and 3rd place getting 10, etc., etc. This system places less emphasis on winning by decreasing the margins between the amount of points awarded to each position. Because of this, when we rescore the 2020 season using this system, Joan Mir wins again. This sort of makes sense. As the systems get closer to our modern day system, we should start to see results that mirror the real-life results a little more closely. One trend I did notice, however, is that there's a particular rider who is suffering a lot from the net point system, Andrea Dovizioso. See, in 2020, Dovizioso finished a very respectable 4th in the championship by consistently finishing in the mid to low point scoring positions. However, in the older systems, these convert to low to non-scoring positions. Dovizioso has fallen further than any other rider in almost every system so far. But we are moving towards the system we have today. Surely, the next point system will be a reasonable, healthy step forward.
Opnieuw razendsnel weg voor het andere veld. Het is ongelooflijk hoeveel hartog dat altijd toch weer...
Oh dear God, it wasn't. In 1976, the FIM realized that riders were ignoring too many races on the calendar. Now, the reasonable solution to this would seem to be to switch to a gross point system. You can't ignore races if all of the races count. However, there is one major issue with this that you may not have figured out yet. It makes way too much sense. Instead, the FIM decided to split the season in half, and use 2 separate net point systems, taking the 3 best results from each half of the season and combining the totals to get a rider's final points tally. Make sense? No? Good. If we apply this system to the 2020 season, the season gets split down the middle, with the first half consisting of the 7 rounds starting in Jerez and ending with the Emilia-Romagna round, and the second half starting in Catalunya and ending in Portimao. I took the 3 best results from each rider in each half of the season, added them together, and found that Morbidelli wins again. This really isn't the best season to show how broken this system is. If we had one rider who was dominant during the first half and average during the second half, we could see them lose to another rider who was just consistently good all season, even if they should have lost in a gross or even a normal net point system. The biggest riser here is Jack Miller. He had 4 podiums all season, but they were evenly split between both halves of the season. He jumps from 7th all the way up to 3rd in the championship results. This was not the solution to the problem the FIM was hoping for, and after just one season, they came to their senses and switched to...
Oh, for crying out bloody loud!
Finally, a gross points system. The FIM realized that the best solution to make riders stop ignoring the races was just make all the races count. They kept the same points distribution they had used since 1969, don't fix what's not broken and all that. This system looks very similar to the modern day one, and so it's not surprising that when we rescore the 2020 series, Joan Mir wins again. There isn't much change to speak of in this system. The top 10 remains relatively stable. Dovizioso and Vinales move down, Miller and Pol Espargaro move up, so on and so forth. What is worth discussing are the people we haven't seen yet. Because all the point systems we have seen so far haven't awarded points for finishes below 10th place, there are some point-scoring riders from 2020 who haven't appeared yet. These riders are Bradley Smith, Tito Rabat, and Michele Pirot. This won't stay the case for long though, because next we have...
World champion, amazing...
Points for everyone. In 1988, the FIM decided to start awarding points to all riders who finished within the top 15. Now, first place receives 20 points, second receives 17, third receives 15, and so on and so forth down the order. This marked the first change in the points distribution in nearly 20 years. And this distribution brought the value of each position even closer together. Rescoring the 2020 season, we can see that Joan Mir wins by a wider margin than he did in 2020, even though he scored less points. This is because of that distribution pattern. Since Mir won through consistent podium finishes, the increased value of those finishes relative to a win means that his season would have netted him more points relative to everyone else using the 1988 point system. Now, this system was technically used for one more year. However, there was one change that is worth talking about going into...
Once he's got the best of that little bites...
In 1991, the point system was kept the same, except for the fact that riders were allowed to exclude their 2 worst results on the season. So if you had an unfortunate breakdown or crash, you could write those results off. Wait, this is just net points with extra steps. This isn't necessarily a bad system. It does its job, but it does unnecessarily punish the riders who were the most consistent throughout the year. This can be seen in the rescored 2020 results using this system. The results look nearly identical, and this is because all but 2 riders retired from at least 2 races, so their results stay the same. The only riders who see a change in this system are Andrea Dovizioso, whose 13th place at Teruel is excluded, meaning he loses 3 points and drops 1 place. Also, Jack Miller loses 2 points with the exclusion of his results at Brno and drops 1 spot. This system only lasted for 1 year, so surely the next system will last for longer.
Kevin Schwantz has taken the marshal's flag. It's the oil flag. He's saying...
Here we are, the end of the road. The last point system used before the one that we know and love today. And it's sort of a step backwards? The scoring distribution reverts and only awards points to the first 10 finishers similar to systems pre-1987, but wins have much more emphasis placed on them. Presumably the FIM didn't want riders scoring less points for a win than they had in the previous system, so the winner still gets 20 points, but second and third place only get 15 and 12 points respectively. Using this system, Mir wins the 2020 championship one final time, trailed closely by Morbidelli and then not that closely by everyone else. That brings us back to the present. Really, it's sort of impressive how consistent the scoring systems are throughout the years. Mir wins in a vast majority, which means that the FIM has historically done a very good job of figuring out who the best rider that season was and awarding them the championship. So I hope that this was a valuable walk through the point systems that were good and the point systems that were not so good throughout FIM history. And hopefully they don't change the point system again like next year or something so this video becomes immediately irrelevant. Anyway, thank you for watching. Feel free to give me a like and subscribe. Before the video ends, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Mr. V's Garage. He does Formula 1 content, and this video was pretty heavily inspired by his series where he rescores Formula 1 seasons using weird and wacky point systems. I wanted to place a little more emphasis on the history in this video. That's why I only did like FIM point systems throughout the years, and I also just didn't want to copy him completely. But he makes great content. Go check out those videos. I'll link them in the description below. I don't really know what I want to use this channel for. This is the first video on it. Hopefully I don't just abandon it immediately. But I like doing statistics, and I really like MotoGP. And there's not that many MotoGP channels that aren't just an AI voice talking over footage. So I'm hoping that eventually... It's windy. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.